Hello, guys, and welcome back to Time Under Tension. This week, we're going to be talking about self-sabotage. So, self-sabotage is a term that is thrown around pretty frequently these days. And honestly, almost every single person I've spoken to reports some form of self-sabotage. And even those people who like to present themselves as more put together and disciplined often still experience self-sabotage. I've been training for a long time. I started training like weightlifting when I was 16. I've been very dedicated and diligent in my pursuit of fitness, and I think of myself as a pretty disciplined person in that arena. However, there are still times when I struggle with self-sabotage. And a good example of this is for me, the challenge around resting appropriately. So this may be a little bit opposite of what you experience if you struggle to get into training, but the same concept will apply in terms of self-sabotage. So for me, I'll set an intention to rest more often. I'll say, okay, I'm going to slowly increase activity at a rate that is recoverable, and then I will balance that with an adequate amount of time resting. So on Sundays, I will take a complete rest day. I won't count steps. On the days that I do rest from the gym, I'll do yoga and stretch and meditate. And I'll kind of set those intentions. And then what ends up happening is over time, I start to creep activity up and up and up and get back to a point where suddenly I'm exhausted, unable to progress physically in the way that I would like to because I'm not resting appropriately. And I find myself back in the same patterns. And for me, this is often tied to over caffeinating, overworking. It tends to be this general increase in grinding over time, where I can set that intention to create more balance in my life. And then over time, I start to find myself back in that same pattern. The challenge with self-sabotage, the initial challenge, is in our relationship with it. Because it is such a trendy idea and we feel like it's something that we're battling and fighting against all of the time, it can feel like an uphill battle. It can feel very frustrating. It can start to derail our sense of self and identity because we start to see ourselves as someone who cannot follow through with the things that we commit to. And when that happens, we have to either set smaller goals, stop setting goals, or we start to ignore the dissonant behavior because it is too difficult to face the fact that we're saying one thing and we're showing up in a different way. So that fractured identity starts to come out of self-sabotage, and we start to blame self-sabotage as the reason that we can't progress towards goals. And then we lose our sense of confidence, which often prevents us from continuing to pursue goals, which then blocks us from growth. However, we should not get stuck there. And I think it all starts with our relationship with self-sabotage. So what is self-sabotage? Self-sabotage really is returning to familiar patterns. It's not our bodies and minds trying to uproot our goals, trying to undermine our intentions. Instead, our bodies and minds are created and evolutionarily wired to keep us safe. And we develop a sense of safety in familiarity. So safety may not actually be safe. For instance, if we grew up in an environment that was extremely chaotic, that can feel safe to us at times because it is at least familiar. We can predict what can happen in those places. We understand how to operate within that environment. So it may not actually be safe, but it is familiar. So similar with habits. Say we have a habit of, for me, I'll just stick with this example, my habit of overtraining. That's familiar for me. I know that if I'm grinding and working hard and caffeinating and I have this sense of progressing in my life, I feel more comfortable. I tend to feel more unsettled when I'm taking more time to rest. And so I can set that intention to create more balance, but over time I start to creep back to that place that feels more familiar for me, especially when stressors come in and I want to start to feel a sense of control. So a lot of times we set an intention when we have the space to do so, and then as stressors come in, that self-sabotage tends to creep up. And self-sabotage truly is just an attempt to reestablish a sense of safety, which means getting back to what's familiar and maintaining equilibrium, even if that equilibrium is no longer serving you, which is why self-sabotage can seem so toxic at times. But when we start to see it as something that is trying to help us, trying to serve us, I think that we can have a different relationship with it and start to move through self-sabotage to more productive and supportive behaviors and strategies. So self-sabotage is our body's, our mind's way to protect us, to keep us in a state of familiarity that's at least feels safe. We know that we've survived doing this behavior, operating out of this mindset, within this environment, with this pace of living in the past. We've survived there. So it's a safe bet that we can continue to survive there. However, when we want to move past surviving to truly thriving and growing in our lives, we're going to have to branch out of what's familiar and comfortable into the unknown. And the unknown represents death in terms of the way that our bodies and minds look at life. If it's unknown, unfamiliar, unpredictable, that could be dangerous. That could lead to death and extinction. So we want to avoid that most of the time. But our higher selves who want to grow, our spiritual selves who feel called towards a higher purpose, often are being called towards that place of fear. And it's that decision of, can I face this fear and let it rise up and say, okay, there it is again. Good. Let me move through this. Let me lean into this. Let me recognize when self-sabotage comes up that it's my body and mind trying to protect me from the unknown. Now I can thank that and say, hey, thank you so much. I see this pattern coming up again. I see myself starting to overtrain. I see myself starting to overcaffeinate and overwork and push myself too hard. I got it. Thank you. I'm feeling a little out of control right now. I feel a little stressed right now. And so I'm turning to the things that have at least helped me survive in the past. Thank you for that. Thank you for trying to keep me safe. I'm going to try something different now. So it's kind of having that conversation with yourself where you're not turning away and turning outside of yourself, looking at yourself with shame and frustration and guilt and saying, why are you doing this? Why are you self-sabotaging? Which doesn't work. We need more like positive reinforcement. Instead, we go, gotcha. Okay, look, we're doing it again. We're starting to creep up. It's okay. We're just trying to self-protect. We're trying to stay in what's familiar. But remember when we committed to growing? Remember when we committed to this new behavior? Remember how excited you were about that? Let's realign with that. I know it's unfamiliar. I know it's scary. I know it's taking a ton of willpower and mental capacity to continually recommit to this, but I know this is the direction that I'm supposed to go. I know this is what God's calling me to do in my life. I know this is aligned with my higher purpose. I know the universe is pulling me in this direction. Let's keep going. Let's keep moving towards this. This is where I grow. In the discomfort is where I grow. And that conversation can massively shift your relationship with self-sabotage, which shifts your relationship with yourself, because you no longer see yourself as something that you're fighting against all of the time. Instead, you recognize and acknowledge and accept that your body and mind are always just trying to protect you. And although they can do that in really funky ways sometimes, trying to put us back in situations that ultimately we know are bad for us, truly, they're just operating out of this sense of familiarity. They're trying to keep us where we've been because that's where we've survived. But if we want to go somewhere else, we have to understand that fear, discomfort, and also a ton of intentionality is going to come with that, because we're telling ourselves now, hey, you've had this identity for a long time, this identity that's been tied to these behaviors, these patterns, these thought cycles. Now we want to do something new, expand in a new way. This is going to take creating a new identity, and that's going to take a ton of repetition. Just like it's taken a ton of repetition to make this thing familiar, which at the beginning of our lives was incredibly unfamiliar. Now we have to do that with this. If I want to become a runner, I'm going to have to do something different than I always did. But then I can start to think, oh, I'm a runner. It's my identity. What would a runner do right now? And start to inhabit that identity early on in the process. That can really help with that frustration around self-sabotage. Remember, You tell yourself to remember, hey, remember that we committed to this? We are this now. We are working towards this now. What would this kind of person do? And we realign with that and continue to come back to it. Be a recommitment machine. That's it. It's not about perfection. It's about being a recommitment machine. Recommit over and over and over and over again until ultimately that is your commitment. That is your identity. That is the thing that you've so deeply ingrained through daily repetition and practice and visualization that it is who you are. And that happens kind of very, very slowly and then all at once. It'll take a ton of effort initially. And then as a stressor comes up and as big life changes happen, you probably go through phases where you start to slip back into old behavior. But if you can promise yourself that you will recommit every time you catch yourself just trying to get back to familiarity, you will one day wake up and realize that you're invested in that new behavior, that it's habitual, that that mindset isn't so hard to maintain, and you are that person. And it's crazy when that happens. It is so reaffirming of your identity. It is such a huge boost to your confidence that with that energy, you can then grow even more because you realize, oh, I set this intention. I stuck with it. I did grow. I showed myself that I can create a sense of safety in the unfamiliar. And now, out of that, what else could I do? And you continue to push towards the things that are important to you, the vision that you want to create for your life. So, self-sabotage is not trying to get you down. It is not your lack of willpower, lack of commitment, lack of strength, laziness, none of those degrading concepts that we just tape to ourselves. No, it's our body's mind's way of keeping us safe. And we just have to show ourselves that we can maintain safety in the unknown, that safety is within us, and that as we continue to recommit, we can start to create new patterns that serve us more effectively in the lives that we are living today. That maybe that old pattern served us in the past and we can thank it for what it's done for us. But now we're being called to a higher way of living. That's going to take practice and repetition, but we know that we can move towards it. So if you struggle with self-sabotage, I would love to hear your story. You can comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Otherwise, you can always feel free to email me or DM me. I'd love to hear your story. And if you've overcome self-sabotage, let me know what's worked well for you. How did you break through a plateau of going back to the same behaviors over and over again to finally make that change? What was your threshold moment? Or was it just a continually slow process of recommitting daily? And if there's something that you're running into self-sabotage with, comment that below. Let me know what is something you feel really stuck on. And then what are your intentions moving forward as you kind of listen to this and think about how these concepts may apply to your situation. As always, thank you guys so much for listening and or watching. Please remember to like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Follow the channel if you're listening to this via podcast. I really appreciate your support. I'm always so excited to bring you more content. If there's anything ever that you want to talk more specifically about, please let me know. You can always reach out to me. And otherwise, I will catch you next time on Time Under Tension.